we have Siberian elm here. And a couple things you can just see from this is the natural gray bark, but as we turn it a little bit, we start seeing the blacking occur. That's going to be what's called sooty mold fungus, and that is what happens after insect poop called honeydew from simple insects such as aphids, mites, leaf piercing, chewing insects will suck out the sap, process it. Because they're such simple insects, they basically poop sugar water out of the sap. That sugar water, when 60-65 degree temperatures in the spring and the fall come on with a little bit of morning moisture or evening moisture, turns into a topical fungus, sooty mold, and it just rubs off, and you can get a little black on there. It's sooty mold because it looks like soot in a fireplace. Here you can also see great interior physiological features of where you should have good grain crossing over, but you don't. You have the beginning of included bark. So over here we have an excluded bark ridge, which is going to be a good crossover grain. Up here we have an included bark ridge as it transfers. So with the excluded bark ridge, you have a good crossover grain that will hold better. It's stronger. Up here, this wood is not growing in together, so it can separate more. So you can see a lot there. Here on the back side, we see the different features of how a tree matures. This is going to be heartwood, where this discoloration line is, and it's not coated. This is not wall 4 of the chemical barrier. This is different. This is a physiological change where this wood no longer is transporting starches or sugars, and it's not available as a resource to grow. It's a structural resource to the tree. Here though, we can see we have about 14 years of rings. We can count those. We didn't have a lot of moisture on this side. We had some good moisture feeding here, so this is probably a better wood feeding up. And then as we get into a tighter area, your rings get tighter. So we had a little bit of wound here. It looks like maybe 7-8 years ago. I might think that could have been a hard frost possibly, or maybe an injury of some type. Could have been hail damage, could have been a woodpecker, whatever. And then you have wall 4 around that, where that blackening doesn't spread to the rest of it. So that's going to be your physiological hold, so that decay doesn't get worse. But you can definitely see where you had good growth on this wider 1/8 inch, maybe millimeter growth rings, and then they get down to, you know, just ridiculous, 1/2 millimeter. So this tree didn't succumb to the insects for no reason. It came, as you can see, the growth features are so small that you had a higher level of stress than when you did 15 years ago when this tree was living well. So the sooty mold is going to be a direct reflection of insects coming in due to stress levels increasing to poor growth. It's fascinating. So right here you have the bark, you have the cambium right here, xylem and phloem on each side of that. Xylem, xy high, phlo low. So your phloem takes nutrients from the ATP exchange and the chemical changes in photosynthesis, takes them back down to the roots for storage as starch and sugars, and then the xylem brings up the nutrients as they're absorbed on a cell by cell level. So you don't just get a straw and suck up nitrogen for the day. That root has to pull in one, cell with water, and it brings one ion of nitrogen across a barrier, one at a time, and it goes up the xylem and into the tree, into the leaf, ultimately where photosynthesis happens. Due to the photosynthesis, how that occurs, you get a change of protein, amino acids, things like that, and you get ATP exchange. Then it turns it into a starch and a sugar, gives off an oxygen molecule, puts on a hydrogen, exchanges all that stuff, the CH and the O's and all the little dashed lines between it, changes the formulation and pushes it back down. So right here you have a really strong xylem on the outside of this, and you have the cambium line right there. Not as well seen on this area over here. So yeah, I mean, this is the classroom pile. Here we have cottonwood, and we can see the different structures of the bark where that cambium is right here behind it. We have some really good growth rings here, tightens up in this area, gets big again. You have some nice cellular development. And then behind it, so yeah, now we have the beginning of secondary insects, which are going to be tunneling behind the bark. That insect didn't cause this dieback. That insect happened because of stress came in and caused the problem to get worse. So there's certain insects, depending on where they're located, in front of or behind the cambium, is going to be indicative of the kind of damage they would cause to the tree.
This was already dead when he, or
this was dying. Yeah. It was dying, and I'm guessing by the discoloration change in here, it probably had some Cytophthora. So you can see a little bit of that brownish and how this spreads in this area, but over here we're pretty good and strong. But right here it's a little bit darker, and you have some discoloration right in there. So you had a little bit of disease, you had some stress, insect came in secondary. If it were poplar borer, you would have one adult come in and you'd have all the kids come off of it. And you'd have a gallery of egg sac that changed. Bark beetles also do the same thing. So you can look at all this and see here, we can see where we had a bunch of different, we had a knot in here, so this was an old limb. And then as that limb was removed, you had a bunch of epicormic or endocormic growth sprouts or adventitious sprouts come off of where this was attached and try to grow more limbs. So whatever removed this limb, that system wasn't done feeding the tree, and the tree was like, oh, I need to grow more stuff here and get energy and get leaves here and draw in energy. And that's where all this comes from. So it's not that this is a reaction to the lack of this limb. These little dots here, as they grew in sprouts, are a reaction of the whole system going, I'm not getting fed as well. I need to get that energy back. So that's where you're going to see, you know, sprouts come from, things like that. This is the classroom. I love this. This is going to be your bark beetles, where you have this tunneling right here. This probably connected over here. You have smaller as they get bigger.
Is that an engraver beetle?
No, it's probably not. No, Ips is a much smaller hole,
okay,
a much smaller line. This one has, I forget the type of insect that it is, but you can see where they pack the frass from as they eat through the tunnel. They fill the tunnel back in with the sawdust that they're eating from. So you have these little backfilled galleries. So that's going to be a different type there. Well, yeah, this is a classroom. This is going to be, looks like some maybe lichens or some kind of secondary growth with a green. I would think this is going to be just topical.
That's a fence post too. So.
Yeah, it's a cedar fence post. And what we have here is probably going to be, it's not lichens, it's the other one. But this is just going to be the growth of that plant or the living system that's growing on something else. So this is, yeah, normal. Yeah.
What about the holes in this one? Is that?
This is going to be
like a punky wood almost.
Yeah, and this is going to be probably, this wood died out. You have a bunch of different galleries in here. This kind of looks like termite damage to me, but I'm not sure that termites are in this area. I don't know a lot about termites. I haven't done structural, but you can see how evasive they got and just kept going and kept going and kept going. So you have multiple generations of insects causing this damage. This wasn't 1 year. This was numerous years, over and over and over, where this occurred. And again, some of these, you see how they pack the frass, the sawdust that they eat as the gallery, they pack it back in the gallery, and then they come out in the bigger holes when they're adults. Yeah.